And as we talked about before we started, I can't believe it was back in January, uh, which was a lifetime ago of 2020, that was my first appearance. And I was honored at that point to have been asked to speak, and I was honored once again to have been asked to speak. I do feel maybe a little bit of I don't know what the word is, but I mean, I feel a little problem that maybe I caused the downfall of the Micah Center because I mean, I'm such a, magnanimous speaker that people didn't want to attend anymore in January. And, I caused a global pandemic so that so nothing had to happen again. But I was very happy and I was honored when Pastor Joe asked me if I would speak again, and I'm very happy to be here again. When I spoke in January, talked about we were coming up on the election season. We had the presidential primary in March, we had the state primary in September, and then we had the state election in November. Well, all of those things are in our rearview mirror now. Thank you very much. I'm very appreciative that it's all in our rearview mirror right now. And we're trying to get our lives here in the city clerk's office back to normal, to do the things, the other work that we kind of neglected a little bit, only because this election season turned out to be probably one of the busiest, if not one of the most scrutinized election seasons ever. Um, to start, I'll back up to March. I mean, since I talked in January. In March, we had the presidential primary. And the state of Massachusetts did early voting in the presidential primary. They did a week of early voting, which we anticipated and we knew it was going to happen. And so we had 5 days of early voting, and all went well, and people, enjoyed it, and they liked it a lot. And the presidential primary went not to a lot of people's liking, because there were several candidates the day before the March election that dropped out. I know Pete Buttigieg, I believe Amy Klobuchar, some of the Democratic candidates decided to bail the day before the election, because we fielded a lot of calls in our office about people who wanted to vote again because they didn't think it was fair, because they voted for their candidate and their candidate left the race. And we had to spend a little time explaining to people that, unfortunately, I mean, nothing we can do about that. It's just the course of politics, and people decided that they wanted to get out. So the presidential primary went without any real fanfare, and everything went as the democratic process went on, and as we know, President-elect now Joe Biden became the Democratic nominee. President Trump was the Republican nominee, and now we move ahead to September, and we had the state primary, which people. So now all of a sudden we're in the midst of a global pandemic, though, after March. And I guess I jumped forward too much. I skipped from March to September. So during those months intervening between March and September, the Great and General Court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was debating and cajoling and going back and forth with a bill that they ended up passing, which is Chapter 115 of the Acts of 2020, which was a bill related to voting during COVID-19. And what the state was trying to do is they were trying to make things a little easier for people to vote. They were trying to make things, I know some people have their own feelings, and I don't want to offend anyone. Some people have their own feelings about that early voting and vote by mail and absentee voting. They're all duplicated processes and things like that. I'm of the belief, as the city clerk, my job as the city clerk, as the chief election official of this city, is to just make sure that people have the right to vote. And I believe, and that's why I said this earlier as well, I'm probably an oddity amongst my colleagues in city and town clerkdom, that I believe whatever we can do to make it easier for people to vote, we should do. I mean, and I believe that this bill that the legislature passed, it made it much easier for people to vote. It gave people the option if they wanted to vote by mail. It gave people the option if they wanted to vote early vote. It gave people the option, if you wanted to wait until election day, you could do that. But I'm of the belief, and I view my job, I mean, other clerks will disagree with me and they will have their own opinions. But I'm of the belief that whatever I need to do to make sure that the citizenry of Marlborough has the opportunity to get out and vote, they should be able to get out and vote. We learned some lessons in March, And we tried to accommodate them in September for early voting and things like that, because the state added early voting. Some of the changes that they made, let me start with that. Some of the changes that the COVID bill made. They made some permanent changes to the election law, and they made some not permanent changes. When I say not permanent changes, they December 31st of this year, some of the changes that they made to the law are going to go away. But some of the permanent changes that they made is the deadline to request an absentee ballot is now the 4th business day before the election. Excuse me. To request an absentee ballot by mail, I should say. And that was more a nod to the city and town clerks to give us an opportunity, because before you had up until noon the day before the election to request an absentee ballot. So if we received your email or your application by email or fax at 11 o'clock the day before the election, we were duty bound to send you a ballot. Well, I got news for you. As wonderful as the United States Postal Service is, and the city of Marlborough, they did a fantastic job here in the city of Marlborough. I can't say enough about the men and women of the Marlborough Post Office. Again, I'm only going to talk about Marlborough. But there is no way that I can get you a ballot if you send me a request the day before the election to get it put in the mail, mailed to you, and then you have to get it back to me by the close of polls on election day. It's just not possible. So the legislature changed that law. They changed same thing for early balloting 4 days before the election. So those are permanent changes. They changed the law about if you're admitted to a healthcare facility, when you can request a ballot. But I mean that early voting, they changed when the early voting period begins, because before, it's going to sound really silly, but in 2016, when early voting came into play in Massachusetts, we couldn't send out the early voting ballots until the early voting period began. So, for example, if the early voting period was 2 weeks before the election and you sent your request in 2 months before the election, we had to sit on that application until 2 weeks before the election, and then we could mail everything out. So the legislature said, okay, no, that's kind of silly. So once you get all the materials, cities and town clerks, send them out. So that made our job a little, they were trying to make the jobs of city and town clerks a little bit easier. So they did that. The biggest change that they made, that has been a permanent change to the election law, is that mail-in ballots may be returned in person, by mail, or in a secure drop box. So those of you who have visited City Hall here in Marlborough now, we have 2 secure drop boxes now permanently affixed outside, not just for elections, but for all City Hall business. If you want to pay a bill, if you want to request a building permit, you want to request a marriage or birth or death certificate, whatever you want, you can drop it off 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the box outside. And those are checked every day. During election season, they were checked every 40 minutes. They're checked every day, several times a day. And so that was the biggest change. So you can drop your ballot in a drop box. I know some people, they weren't fans of that. They didn't like that idea. They thought, okay, it was unsecure and people could, tamper with the drop box and things like that. Well, we didn't find any, knock on wood, we didn't find any problems with the drop boxes at all. All the ballots that, were returned to us, we were able to get back in. I will tell you a story of a couple of people who called our office and said, I dropped my ballot in the drop box, and when I went to the Track My Ballot app, it says you haven't received it yet, but I dropped it in the drop box 2 days ago. Where is it? And then we would do a little bit more, asking a few questions and things like that. And they said, well, yeah, that big blue box right outside of City Hall. Well, the big blue box right outside of City Hall is the mailbox. So they dropped their ballot in the mailbox, which is fine. But it usually just took 2 or 3 days. And then all of a sudden the ballot would appear in the office. But I mean, they would call us up and they were afraid that, their ballot wasn't there. It's a wonderful thing that the state did. And again, a little facetious, but I mean, it was a wonderful thing with the Track My Ballot app. But unfortunately, I don't think people read the Track My Ballot app all the way through when they did it. We had a lot of calls with people when they tracked their ballot. They would say, you rejected my ballot. And we would look, and we'd say, no, your ballot has been accepted. Nope, it says right here, I'm looking right at it. It says you rejected it. And they were reading the glossary underneath that said rejected means, no, accepted means yes. So we would have to tell them, nope, push your eyes up about 2 lines and then, oh, there it is. Oh, okay. So they would get that, and that was good. So One of the changes that the other changes that they made that's going to go away on December 31st is the deadline for registering to vote. Prior to this bill being passed in July, the deadline to register to vote for any election, city, state, or federal election, was 20 days prior to the election. They moved the deadline up to 10 days prior to the election. The only bad part about that was 10 days prior to an election, because the elections fall on the first Tuesday following the first Monday. It's always a Saturday. So now when you count back 10 days, that means that city and town clerks have to be open on Saturday. And again, it's not the end of the world. As many people who know me, and my wife will certainly attest, I have no life. So for me to spend a few hours in the office on Saturday afternoon, it doesn't bother me. But I can't speak for the 350 other city and town clerks across the Commonwealth that they want to spend their Saturday afternoons sitting in their office for no one to show up, because you can register to vote online, you can register to vote with your phone, you can register to vote by carrier pigeon, you can register to vote by thousands and thousands of methods. So people really don't visit city and town clerks anymore, offices anymore, to register to vote. So I don't know if that change is going to become permanent. I can't say that I'll be sad if it doesn't, because again, maybe I get my Saturday afternoons back, but that's okay. A couple of the other changes that they made, early voting in person, they required Saturday and Sunday hours. Required it, not where in years gone by, the Secretary of State's office, it used to be Monday through Friday during the normal business hours of the city or town clerk. Now the legislature wrote into the law and said that you are required to have hours on Saturday and Sunday. And the number of hours are based on the number of registered voters that you have in the city. So for example, the city of Marlborough has a little over 24,000 voters, about 24,500 voters. So we were required to have 5 hours of voting on Saturday and Sunday. We did a little bit more hours on Saturday, again, because I'm a little bit of a freak of nature, as I'm sure Wilson, who's listening in tonight, is probably nodding his head saying that yes, absolutely he is, because I went over and above what we were required to do. But again, I felt it was important. I feel that it's important that we should make it as easy as humanly possible for all people to vote in the Commonwealth. Let's see. They talked some of the other changes that they made that didn't really impact voters. I mean, it impacted, we could change and we could consolidate polling locations. Here in the city of Marlborough, we didn't do any of that. There were some cities and towns that did, because they felt that, for whatever reasons, they wanted to, consolidate all their voters or consolidate their polling locations. I looked at it and I did not feel that it would be appropriate. I mean, it's hard enough. We recently went through a polling location change for anyone who lives in Ward 5 here in the city of Marlborough. You used to vote at the senior center. And I will raise my hand, when I was the assistant city clerk and I was advocating to move all those precincts over to the senior center. And then after a couple of years of voting at the senior center, we found that it just wasn't working, because there just wasn't enough space. So we moved that polling location back to the Masonic Lodge where it was before. And I'll admit, I mean, I'm not afraid to say I was wrong. I was wrong at the time. I thought it was the best thing that we could do for the city, but I learned a lesson, and such is life. But to change a polling location, you have to notify every resident in the city of, every resident who lives in that particular ward. And then unfortunately, my office is not the most glamorous office in the city. So, I mean, if you get a notice from the city clerk, a lot of people just kind of throw it aside and they're like, what's that? It's from the city clerk. I don't really care. And then they go back to their polling place where they always voted. And we're faced with some angry people on election day, because now we tell them that, no, you can't vote here. You have to go, across town, or you have to go somewhere else. So to make changes to election places is not something we wanted to do. And the other big change that they made in the law in Chapter 115 of the Acts of 2020 was for the general election in November and in the primary election in September, we could advance, remove, and advance count early ballots. Now, in September, we did not advance, remove ballots. And what that means is that when you submit your early voting ballot or your absentee ballot for that matter, you fill out an application. And I suppose I should put this rumor to rest as well, because everyone thought that people were just mailed ballots. So there's widespread fraud and there's widespread, shenanigans going on. But I can assure you that in Massachusetts, it's probably one of the safest and securest elections that I've ever seen. Okay. And I'm not saying that because it was my chance to run it, but I'm saying that because the checks and balances that they have in place and the things that we need to do as cities and town clerks, and all the checks and balances that are there, there is just really no way that, well, I shouldn't say there's no way. Someone certainly could, some nefarious person can figure out anything. But I think this is probably one of the safest and securest elections. So, because what happens with all elections, absentee balloting or early balloting, you have to request a ballot. No one in the state of Massachusetts was mailed a ballot who did not request it. That's first and foremost. If you requested a ballot for September or November, and the state, again, as part of that law, I should have mentioned that, as part of the law, the Secretary of State's office was required to send out to all registered voters a card, and I think I sent it out in late July, early August. And if you wanted to request a ballot for September and November, you could sign this card and check off the boxes. So people were mailed a card. So if you requested a ballot for both elections, you were entered for both elections. If you requested it for just September, then you were entered for just September. But you were going to be mailed a second card again in October if you didn't request a ballot in November. But you had to request it. You weren't just mailed. I had a lot of people ask me that, and I had a lot of people say to me, I never requested a ballot. You sent me a ballot. I can't believe that you sent me a ballot. That's, this is fraud. I can't believe. Well, I take that charge very seriously. And I had someone actually go to the polls in September on election day, and his name was crossed off the voting list because he had cast an early ballot. And when you cast an early ballot, you've cast your ballot. And he swore up and down that he had not requested a ballot. He had not received a ballot. He had not returned his ballot. He could not believe that we were going to try to prevent him from voting. Well, there are things in place in Massachusetts for people who believe that, they're aggrieved with voting. So he cast what's called a provisional ballot. And that's it's a process that you go through at the polls where you believe that, your name should appear in the voting list or whatever the case may be. So, and then after that is done, we have to do research in the clerk's office to figure out what happened. Well, I took that, like I said, I took that charge very seriously. And on election day, I started digging through the thousands and thousands of cards that we had found, that were filed with our office. I found the card that he filed. I found the envelope that he signed, so that, he had requested it. The problem was he probably requested it in July and it was September, and he honest and truthfully just forgot. And I understand that, but like I said, the problem that I had was that people were, and I took it personally. I mean, they were impugning the integrity of this office because, like I said, I take my job very, very, very seriously. When it comes to elections, I am a freak, for lack of a better word. I am checking, double checking, triple checking, making sure that everything is right and that we have no issues and we have no problems. So I was a little taken aback by this, particular charge, like I said, but we found it to be unfounded. And that was really the only issue that we had here in the entire city of Marlborough for both September and November. So September, we didn't early remove. We learned our lessons. And then for November, the sheer volume of numbers, and you'll have to excuse me, I'm going to cheat and look at my other computer screen here. In November of 2020, we had a total of 10,233 requests for mail-in ballots. And out of 24,400. So that's 42% of the voting population in Marlborough decided they wanted to vote by mail. So just imagine the sheer numbers of those cards. And we had to get them all entered. because again, the state of Massachusetts, you can track your ballot. And by tracking your ballot, what you can do in Massachusetts, you can track it from the time it leaves my office till it reaches you, till you mail it back to me, until we record it that it's been accepted or rejected or whatever the case may be. So we had to enter all those in the computer. We had to then prepare all those ballots to get mailed out. I know there's someone on the Zoom call who played a role in that, probably was very unhappy that he said yes, that he would come in and work in the city clerk's office, because it was just a huge undertaking. I mean, I cannot thank enough the countless volunteers that we had come in, because if my little office staff of 4 still had to do that, no lie, we'd probably still be mailing ballots out. I mean, and here I am in December. So, which wouldn't bode well for me, since the election was, 3 weeks ago. So it was a great challenge. It was a good challenge because, like I've said in the past, my job is to make sure that you as a voter have every opportunity to vote. And I will do whatever I have to do to honor that. I mean, I've gone to people's homes with ballots. I know we're in a small community, 40,000 residents here in Marlborough. Like I said, about 24,000 registered voters. But I literally have driven to someone's home on my way home and brought their ballot and said, okay, because I know it's not going to make it to you in time. I just know it's not going to make it to you because, there's 2 days before the election, and I'm just not going to be able to do it. I've stood there at the door while they sat at the kitchen table and marked their ballot, and then I bring it back to the office. I've dropped it off and let them mail it back in. Those are things we can do here in the city of Marlborough. I mean, I know we're a country kind of city, or that's going back a few hundred years, I guess. But I mean, those are things that we can do here in Marlborough. And you can't do that in the city of Worcester. You can't do that in Boston, Brookline, Fall River, Springfield. But I take great pride in that. One of the questions that Deb sent me that they asked about what challenges in mail-in voting meant for our office in the terms of processing. Well, like I started to say, and like I've said, processing all these ballots was a huge, huge task. We spent hours and hours and hours just entering all these in. Then we had to wait for the ballots to arrive. And the public is not always patient because, they mailed their card back in August, or they mailed it back in July. And then, a week later, they call me up saying, I sent my card in, where's my ballot? I haven't got my ballot yet. Well, and then we had to explain to them, well, we haven't gotten the ballot. Well, what do you mean you haven't gotten the ballots yet? Well, the state hasn't sent them to us yet. People don't realize that, the Secretary of State's office is responsible for printing ballots and multiple ballot styles for the entire state, especially in a state primary, because, you're talking, and in the state election as well, you're talking Marlborough alone has 2 representative districts. We have the 4th Middlesex and the 13th Middlesex. So right there is 2 ballot styles alone. City of Worcester has probably 10. City of Boston probably has 25. So we had to wait for the ballots to arrive, sweated that out for a little while, scheduled people to come in and work, called them off and said, don't come to work because we don't have the ballots yet. Called them back the next day and said, okay, no, the ballots are supposed to be here, so why don't you come back in again? And then we had them come in, and again, I was so very fortunate that the number of volunteers that we had who stepped up. Some cities and towns faced insurmountable odds trying to find people to work. I actually had people calling me up mad at me because I couldn't have them work because they wanted to volunteer, and we've already filled all the shifts, or we've already filled all the people that we need to fill. And we would tell them, well, we'll add you to the extra list, and if somebody calls off, then we'll call you. And it does happen, but I mean, that's about the best I could do. So it was a huge burden on our office. It meant we had to put in lots of hours after, before we opened in the morning, after we closed at night, on the weekends. But the biggest thing was the number of volunteers that we had. So I was fortunate in that sense. So it was a massive undertaking. I'd do it all again tomorrow. I know people think I'm crazy, but I would do it all again tomorrow. But I would gladly do it again tomorrow with the volunteers that we had, because they were an incredible, incredible group of people. I met some wonderful people who live here in the city of Marlborough, and we laughed. We ate salad on Tuesdays because here at the city clerk's office it's Salad Tuesday. So we we had a lot of fun. And people got the work done. So it was a massive undertaking. As I said earlier before we started the Zoom call, the toothpaste is out of the tube when it comes to early voting and vote by mail. I think the great general court is going to have to allow this now all the time. The biggest problem that we're going to face as city and town clerks, again, I'm going to face as a city and town clerk next year, and I can't believe, we were already talking about the day after the election. Next year's election in November is a municipal election. Okay, I know another barn burner. Nobody wants to vote in a municipal election. We get 80% turnout in a presidential election, which people don't realize they're voting for the electors of president and vice president. But we only get a 20% turnout for the municipal election when you are directly electing the mayor of the city of Marlborough. But that's, we can argue that point later. Next year, I'm not going to be allowed to do early voting. I'm only going to be allowed to do absentee voting. We'll treat it the same. We treated it the same. If you mailed in an absentee ballot, an early ballot, you got a ballot. If you wanted a ballot, you got a ballot. All you gotta do is tell me you want a ballot. We'll get you a ballot. And we're going to do the same thing that we do every year here in the city clerk's office, probably in February. We do an outreach. Every year we get a little bit younger. So I offend another demographic in the city of Marlborough because we send out absentee ballot applications to everyone over a certain age. And last year, I think we picked everyone over the age of 70. So I had people calling me up saying to me, how come I got this thing in the mail? I go to the polls to vote. I'm not old. I don't need a ballot by mail. Well, it's just an option. You don't have to vote by mail if you don't want to vote by mail. It's just an option that we provide, but we provided it to everyone over the age of 70. I said we're probably going to go to 65, and it drives the office staff crazy because then that just means it'll probably be 5,000 or 6,000 people that will mail ballot applications to, and that means that when election time rolls around, we'll probably have 2,000 or 3,000 ballots that we're going to have to mail out. So they'll all be cursing me when we get to election season, but that's okay. We're well compensated here in the city clerk's office. So that was one of the questions you asked. Challenges about volunteer and poll workers. I touched on it a minute ago. Pat, your own pastor from St. Stephen, Joe Grumman, volunteered. Why? I don't know. He said yes.
It was the first honest day's work in my life.
I remember when I talked to him in January and I saw his name on the list of people. And when we were searching for people to call to help come in and stuff ballots, I looked at Wilson and I said, call that guy right there. He can't say no. So call him up. So Wilson called him up and he said yes. And he came in several days and helped us stuff ballots. He came in and on pre-opening day, which was on Halloween here in Saturday in City Hall, and helped us open all the ballots. But I'm going to tell you a quick statistic. We had 111 people from January of 2020 to right up to almost election day. We had 111 people who sent in either an email or filled out a request form on our website that said, I want to work at the polls or I want to help at the polls, which to me was absolutely phenomenal. That's 111 people in addition to the 150 or so already that we have that work the elections. So that doesn't, just because you said you're interested in working the election, and I apologize to anybody out there who filed a form and we never reached out to you. Trust me, it wasn't a slight in any way. It's just, when you're going down the list, you get the first yes, you take it and you move on. We had and the average age was under 50. And it was incredible. I mean, to see the young people who wanted to come out, and I can say young people because now I'm getting into being an older person, as you can tell by the gray in my beard and my hair. But I mean, that the younger people who worked, it was absolutely incredible. And I know, again, and I'm going to point it out, I'm going to embarrass Joe a little bit. He worked at the polls as well on election day, because while he was here volunteering and, stuffing ballots and doing all this other stuff, one of the wardens at one of the polling locations needed help. And she came into my office. She was here helping as well, doing work. And she came into my office and she said, geez, I still need to find 2 or 3 people. And I said, well, you're sitting in the room with 2 or 3 people. Why don't you ask them? The worst that they can say is no. I mean, what's the worst they could say? No. I mean, and if they say no, then we'll grab the list and we'll start making phone calls. So she went back, she marched herself back in the room, and next thing you know, he's working the polls on election day. And from what he told me, he had a good time. I don't know if he, if it's the truth. But
Me talking about it was great. Also, I think our precinct, with one exception, was all millennials.
Yes.
So,
and you are correct, because
all younger people.
I had multiple comments about the precinct that you worked at, because the city of Marlborough has 14 precincts. And in that one particular precinct, they were all probably, the average age was probably about, 28 or 29. And I had a lot of people say to me, oh, they thought it was really great to see younger people involved in elections. Because again, this is not a slight to anyone who works the elections. And this is not I'm trying not to be age discriminant, but the average age of the poll worker usually is, someone who's in their 70s or in their 80s. And that's not a bad thing. That's because those people are retired and they have the time and they have the inclination to volunteer. But what we found with this pandemic is that more and more younger people wanted to get involved and they wanted to volunteer. So I was thrilled, because all across the Commonwealth, people had, city and town clerks had nothing but problems. The Secretary of State's office had to put up a website for volunteers for city and town election workers. I talked to some of my colleagues just in the general area, and they were looking for people to work because they couldn't find people to work. Nobody wanted to work because of the pandemic, and we understood that, and we took steps in our office back in July, June and July. We contacted all our poll workers and we said, if you don't want to work because of the pandemic, just let us know. The last thing I want you to do, though, is please don't call me the night before the election and say, oh, I don't want to work tomorrow, because I don't need to get 100 calls the night before the election, and because you don't want to work because you're a little worried. And I understand that. We took all sorts of precautions. We had all sorts of PPE available for all of the poll workers. We bought plastic shields that were at all the polling locations. We had gloves available, people sanitizing, masks were worn, and the general public was absolutely phenomenal as well. I didn't hear one case. I take that back. I heard one case where somebody didn't want to wear a mask when they came into the polling location. And again, in Massachusetts, you cannot deny them the right. I know, you can't deny them the right to vote because they don't want to wear a mask. But, we had a special little spot that we put them, and, you go vote over there, and then you can hightail it out of here. But I mean, other than that, that was the only thing that we heard. One of the other questions Deb sent me was, how can Massachusetts, and I love this one, I'll be honest with you, Deb, I thought this one was great. How was Massachusetts able to report election results by the next morning while other states took days to weeks to report? That's a great question. Well, all election results are unofficial. So the city of Marlborough published its election results probably, about 11 o'clock. I think it was about 11 o'clock when I finally walked out of here on election night. I published the, all the returns that had come back, because we use optical scan, we use machines, and it prints off a lovely tape, and then, they're unofficial results. Now here in Massachusetts, and I don't mean anything by this to anyone who is not a Democrat or who's a Republican or anything like that. State of Massachusetts was not expected to fall in the column for Donald Trump. I think a blind man could have predicted that Joe Biden was going to win the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Does that mean that, Massachusetts still reported those results? No, what happens on election night? So at the polling location, you put your ballot in the machine. At the end of the night, they run a card through, the end of card through. They print off a tape. They take out all the ballots. They go through the ballots. They make sure that there are, any write-ins or things like that. They're checking for those. They transfer those numbers from the tape from the machine, which those machines are tested prior to every election as required by law. So they take those numbers and they transfer them to a tally sheet that we, a little form that we have filled out, we give them. Then they bring those forms back here to City Hall. we take those forms from each of those precincts and we enter them into a master spreadsheet. Then those results become, like what I just said, unofficial results. But during the night, as we have 14 precincts here in the city of Marlborough. City of Worcester, don't ask me why I know this, they have 53 precincts. So when people come back as the wardens are returning with the election results on election night, the Associated Press asks all of the city and town clerks to call them with the results as they're coming back in. So we make periodic calls, and it's they give us an incentive, or they give to the city and town clerks associations incentives. I mean, incentives by way of they give us money to put in the coffers of the city and town clerks associations. The more you report. So every 2 or 3 precincts that came back in, we would make a call. And we would tell them that, okay, with 10% reporting, 5 precincts reporting. So then AP would make those calls. Now here in Massachusetts, again, I mean, when you look at the state results, there were, it's not hard to see. Some states were a lot closer to call. And unfortunately, you have states where you look at Pennsylvania, for example, where the majority of the state is red because those counties and those cities and those towns are voting Republican, but the population centers are voting Democratic, and they take longer to get their results back. So that's why. I think here in Massachusetts, everything is unofficial. They're uncertified. We had 15 days after the November election to certify, and we did. We took all 15 days to certify the election. We have to go through and make sure that we have all, the Mickey Mouses and the Donald Ducks and the, things like that people write, and we have to, account for all those things. So I think that the reason that Massachusetts was able to report so much faster was just because the state wasn't in play. I mean, if this state was in play, and the election was a lot closer, I think that I don't think that they would have called the election the way they did. I think they called it, from what somebody told me, I think they called it like 8:05. The polls were barely closed, and they had already called Massachusetts. But I don't think it's anything that the state did. I think it's just the work that that the city and town clerks do. Procedures regarding recounts, that's a great question too. Recounts are governed by Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 54, Section 135. If you want to go to bed and get some quick sleep, then I suggest you break out Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 54, Section 135. That's what governs recounts. So a candidate can request a recount. Okay. So for example, Steve Kerrigan runs for office. Steve Kerrigan loses. I can request a recount, but Joe Grauman can't request a recount on Steve Kerrigan's behalf. I have to request that recount. Or I have to sign an affidavit that says that, yes, I'm okay with that. You still then have to have, in cities and towns, city of our size, you have to have 10 voters per precinct to sign the recount petition forms that are available. It says at the state secretary site, but we would make them available here. You need, and those deadlines are, 6 days after a preliminary or primary election. You have until 5 o'clock on the 6th day after the election to file for a recount, or you have until you have the 10th day after an election to file for a recount. You do need 1,000 voters if you're going to file a statewide recount petition, for example. So if someone from the Biden or the Trump campaign wanted to file a statewide recount, they would have had to collect 1,000 signatures. Anyone can file for a recount for a state ballot question. So if the 2 ballot questions, you don't have to be the proponent of the question. Anyone can file for a recount of one of those questions. But if you're a candidate for office, you have to request the recount. You can't, we don't just accept, one of your supporters is mad that you didn't win, so he's going to request a recount. And then there are certain laws that govern that. The last recount we had here in the city of Marlborough was in 2018. It was in the 3rd Congressional District, the Trahan Co race, for those of you that remember. we had a recount in that race, and that was district wide. I believe that Daniel Coe had requested it for the 3rd Middlesex for the 3rd congressional district. So Marlborough was included in that. So we had to. Our results did not change at all. It was nice to see that the machines worked and that everything that was counted was actually counted. But there's certain procedures that follow. The Board of Registrars act as judge during a recount. We have a 3-member Board of Registrars. I serve as the clerk of the Board of Registrars by virtue of my position as city clerk. But we have 3 members of the Board of Registrars. And here in the city of Marlborough, we have 1 Democratic member, we have 1 Republican member, and we have 1 member who is unenrolled. So you can't have more than 2 members of the same political party, including myself. So right now we're okay. We don't have anybody of 2 members of the same political party. But so what would happen during a recount is that the ballots are batched into usually 25 or 50, and then they're counted. And during that time, you have a person from each campaign or each side watching, and they can challenge any vote at that time. And then it goes to the Board of Registrars, and the registrars are the ones who make the determination. And they have to follow the law. There's Code of Massachusetts regulations that they have to follow. There's all sorts of things that you can't just arbitrarily say yes or no. You have to look at the voter's intent. You have to look at all those kind of fun things as well. So. And then once the recount's over, obviously we publish those results, and then it's final. Question about collect.
Steve, can we take some questions from people? I know you got a whole list of questions before this, but maybe a quick one that we have through the chat, and people feel free to either put it in the chat or you can use the raise hand function. Marlia Dutt asks, could you count the mail-in ballots before Election Day?
We could. Under Chapter 115 of the Acts of 2020, we were allowed to count ballots, pre-open and pre-deposit ballots. We did not do that in the city of Marlborough because I felt very strongly about that. I felt that the ballots should be counted on Election Day. There's a whole procedure that we would have had to follow. There was a whole procedure that we had to follow on, pre-opening, which we did on the Saturday before. We opened the 8,000 or 9,000 ballots that we had here in the office, and really the reason that we did that was because in September, as I said, we didn't pre-open, and opening all those ballots in September and then trying to flatten them out and run them through the machines on Election Day, it was a pain in the neck because they've been folded for 2 months. So I made the determination that we're going to do we could do pre-opening, and we did. I didn't feel that we should do pre-deposit because I don't know. It's I guess the one last bastion of Election Day that the votes are counted on Election Day, and that's when they were counted on Election Day. But we could have if we wanted to, but we didn't. Some cities and towns did.
Okay, and then Melanie Wapham says, if we have 40,000 residents and 24,500 registered voters, there must be a substantial number of residents that could be registered but are not. ? How do we encourage more potential voters to register?
It's a great question. Tell all your family and friends. I tell everybody all the time because I ask everyone all the time, you registered to vote? And when someone says to me, no, I'm not registered to vote, I mean, literally, again, you're going to think I'm stranger than I already am, but I carry voter registration cards around with me in my car. So, if I find out that you're not a registered voter, I'm going to hand you a voter registration card and I'm going to tell you, fill it out and mail it in because you should register to vote. And as I argue with my wife all the time, because as she likes to say to me, and she's not on here so I can say this, she likes to say all the time, what is it with you in this voting thing? I'm like, well, geez, this voting thing, it's kind of my job. You know what I mean? It's a big piece of my job is this voting thing. So I tell my wife all the time, you exercised your right to vote. If you walk into the polling location, you walk up to the check-in desk, you pick up your ballot, you march yourself right by those voting booths. You don't stop for 1 minute You walk back to the machine. Well, this year we didn't have to check. You didn't have to check out. That was a big change that I know a lot of people got upset with me about. But I should have mentioned that too. That was something that the state allowed us to do away with, the checkout list for COVID. So we did for COVID. But you can walk right to the checkout list, cross your name off. You can insert a blank ballot. Somebody says to me all the time, well, you didn't vote. Yes, you did. You exercised your right to vote and you decided you didn't want to vote for anybody, but you voted. Your name is crossed off the list. You showed up. You did what you're supposed to do. Melanie, how can we get more people to register to vote? I don't know. I'd stand on the rooftop and scream at the top of my lungs if I thought it would help. But I really don't know. I mean, we tried voter registration drives at schools. We've done those here in the office in the past. We'll probably try it again. I don't know how that will work because of all this COVID stuff, but we went to AMSA and Assabet and Marlborough High School, and we did get a few. You can pre-register to vote at 16 and 17. I'm not a big fan of that, even though I know it contradicts and it goes against what I'm saying about how you should be you should vote and do everything you can to register to vote. The problem is if you're 16 years old and you move 10 times before you turn 18, you don't remember to change your voting address at the city clerk's office, because that's the other big problem that we have here in City Marlborough. People don't realize even if you move from apartment 1 to apartment 2 in the same building, you need to change your voter registration address with the city town clerk. They think, well, I didn't really move. I just moved within the building. Well, yeah, no, but you really do need to change it. So, but I don't know what we can do. I wish I had the answer.
You got to also keep in mind that the 40,000 people, that's including children as well.
That's true. Good point, Wilson. Those are people over the age of 3, under the age of 16, under the age of 18. So I mean, there's some that are included in that, and we have a pretty somewhat transient population, but we've seen the numbers ticking up. I mean, over 24,000 is probably the highest voters that we've had in the city in a long time, which I'm very proud of. And I hope that it continues to grow. We see it grow. Like I said, presidential election goes off the charts. Everybody and their brother comes out to vote in a presidential election. I mean, everybody thinks that they have to vote for president of the United States. And you do have to vote for president of the United States, but you also have to vote for governor, state representative, mayor, city councilor, school committee, dog catcher, whatever it is that's on the ballot, you should show up to your polling location whenever I call an election and say, it's time to vote, people. So, make sure you vote. And I should take a screenshot of everyone here, and I can check the voters list to see if everyone showed up and voted. So I've been known to do that too. So.
Wait, when was election day? No.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Are there any other questions, or else Steve will get back to his list?
Well, no, I was going to, touch on some of the, the collecting the votes for the state. How do we do it? Cities and town clerks are governed by CMR 950-5805. Again, another bedtime reading if you have nothing better to do and you want to catch a few Z's. 950 CMR. And what that is it's the state voter registration system. So as I said, we had 15 days to certify the election. We here in the city clerk's office, we took all 15 days. Only because, for the first 2 or 3 days after the election, we were all probably moving a little bit slower than we normally would. So it probably took us a couple of days to get out of the fog. Then what we have to do is we have to report all that in the state. We have to enter everything into the state system, into the state voter registration system. And then I have to sign it as the chief election official, and then we send it to the Secretary of State. And then once it's received by the Secretary of State, he has to lay it before the Governor's Council. And they certify the election for the Commonwealth, and then they become official results. And that's, so going back to the question about how can Massachusetts report so early, they reported their unofficial results early, but the official results probably weren't reported until sometime after November 18th is when we had to have the certification into the state. So, I mean, I think it was probably sometime around December 1st, actually, that the Secretary of State presents it to the Governor's Council. So the results really weren't official till then. Nobody really cared because their focus was more on Georgia and Pennsylvania and Arizona and those other states that, all the fun stuff was happening. I'm glad I wasn't a city clerk, town clerk in any one of those states. I might have wanted for a little bit, but 5 minutes and then didn't want to do it anymore. But so that's kind of voting in a nutshell. I mean, I could talk for hours about, the importance of voting and elections in general and things of that nature. I mean, it's, I could bore the bark off a tree if you want to talk about elections. So.
Well, thanks, Steve. That was really, really informative and, dare I say, pleasant. And thanks so much for coming to us and sharing your wisdom. And I'm just gonna turn things over to Deb Roberts, our Micah Center chair.
Well, first, you're not boring, so you can call yourself boring, but it's fascinating. And I think to all of us, when we undertook voting 101, the first time around, it was sort of access to the ballot, trying to get more people to register. But little did we know at that point how important and how, much of an issue this was going to be in this country. And to understand the whole voting process, I think, going forward for the next election, it's a municipal election, but as you said, more important or equally as important as, and, I think we need to, continue our work to encourage people to vote and somehow, get our community together. I feel like Marlborough is like a nice community where it is, as a testament to you and all the people that you had working at the election who showed up, in a pandemic to, to volunteer. And that is, a really special thing. And it's a testament to you and the younger people, right? Coming out like Pastor,
Yeah, I know. Like I said, I was pleasantly surprised when I saw his name on the list. And like I said, I knew that he wasn't going to say no. And if he said no, then, I was going to call you all up and tell you that, he said no. So and get him in trouble. But it's phenomenal. I mean, like I said, scream from the rooftops. You guys have done a tremendous job. I mean, with this and to just have something like this available and to make it known in the community and spread the word about how important it is to register to vote and to vote. Like I said, it's just, we're gonna, this early voting and vote by mail. This is something that's here to stay, and it's going to make it so much easier for people to vote. You didn't have to leave the comfort of your home in this election in 2020. You didn't have to leave your house to cast a ballot to elect the leader of the free world. And I mean, and if I have my way, you won't have to leave your home if you want to elect the leader of the city of Marlborough. All you have to do is, like I said, pass the word. Just ask our office, and we will get you a ballot. I will get, as I said, I've hand delivered, and I will hand deliver ballots if I need to.
I did have some feedback from New Horizons. My mom's over there, and they were all super excited that they could bring their ballot to City Hall and then get like a receipt that it was accepted. And that process was really well received with the seniors because they want to know that their ballot got there. They really weren't about putting it in the drop box. So I just want to share that went really well. And that's,
Thank you. And that was that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we faced, is that the fear that people had that their ballot was not going to be counted, and that, their ballot, but rest assured, every ballot that was sent to the city clerk's office was counted.
Yeah.
Every ballot. I mean, there's no ballots hidden anywhere that, we sent ballots out we're allowed by law to send 3 ballots out if you make a mistake. And we sent, 3 ballots out to somebody because, they kept making a mistake. But so, like I said, if you sent your ballot in, it was counted. But that was one of the biggest fears that people had about this election was, and I think that unfortunately in other states, there were some horror stories that I heard, about, ballots being found in dumpsters and, mailman, dumping ballots because they didn't want to deliver them and things like that. And I can say with absolute certainty, I know nothing like that happened here in the city of Marlborough. And I can only speak to our little bubble. I can only speak to our little slice of heaven here in the world. I can't say what happened in other cities and towns, but I know here in the city of Marlborough, this was probably the safest and securest election that we've run in a long, long time.
Well, that feels really good. And kudos to you and all the volunteers and your staff and everyone that works so hard. So thank you so much for coming out to speak to us and, we'll keep it moving. So,
Thank you. It was nice seeing you all. I mean, I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Yes, thank you.
and thank you for everyone who showed up to listen. Spread the word.
Yes,
Yep. And thanks, Deb, our Micah Center chair. Take care, everybody. Have a good
Okay.
night.
good evening.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.